So there have been a few things in this 3D and GameMaker series that I've just mentioned once or twice and then hand waved away saying that maybe I'd come back to it someday. And one of those things is how depth works in 3D in GameMaker. And most of the time, I don't really find dealing with depth in 3D in GameMaker is a very useful thing to do. I'd much rather just set the depth of everything to 0 and pretend it doesn't exist. But once in a while, someone will try to use depth in 3D in GameMaker, and it might behave in ways that they don't expect. And that can cause some problems, so to hopefully hit some of those issues on the head, let's talk about depth in 3D in GameMaker. This is going back to my old billboarding shader video from demo from like 2 years ago. The reason for this is partially because I want to be dealing with sprites specifically, and this demo already has some sprites added to it, and also because the billboarding shader in particular can have some interactions with depth that perhaps you would prefer that it didn't. And this is usually, when I hear about people having troubles with depth in GameMaker in 3D, it's usually either because of the camera being drawn after everything else, or it's because of something going wrong with the billboarding shader, trying to use depth in ways that that the user doesn't want. So we'll be addressing those later. So as a bit of a refresher, everything in this demo is drawn on the regular default instance layer with a depth equals 0. That's fine. I did originally write a little bit of code in the create event of obj billboard, which is the tree that just assigns the depth value to an independent non-built-in variable z, and then sets depth to 0. And if I'm going to be playing with objects on layers in the room editor in 3D, that's usually what I'm going to do. Depth is a very useful tool when it comes to the room editor because it allows you to layer things, and when you're drawing stuff in 2D in GameMaker, it's useful because that's what determines what is in front of or behind other things. But when you move into the world of 3D, pretty much in every case you'll want to take over that and do it yourself, and you won't want GameMaker to try to do the automatic things that it does with depth. So setting it to 0 like this is a good idea. In this particular case, we are using z as a parameter to pass to the draw sprite billboard function, and that goes over here, and it goes into the matrix build function, which is fine. That's a perfectly normal way to use a third coordinate in 3D space that won't do anything that you don't expect. But getting back to the point, I'm going to go and create myself a new object. Let's call it something like obj generic tree. And this is just going to have the tree sprite assigned to it. It's going to have its visible checkbox checked. We are not going to be adding any events like a create event or a draw event. We're just going to have it exist. If I were to go back to the room editor, and I'm going to go and plop this down in the corner over here. This is going to be drawn just as it is. There's not going to be any transforms. There's not going to be any billboarding. It's just going to be drawn where it originated, lying flat on the ground like this. Now, what happens if I were to go and create myself a new instance layer at, for example, depth equals -100, that's fine. GameMaker will attempt to auto-sort layers and their depth when you create new ones. And I'm going to add obj generic tree to depth equals -100. So this is going to end up so that instead of having the sprite drawn lying flat on the ground, the sprite is actually going to be drawn 100 pixel units below the player's feet, below the floor. And a little known fact about depth in GameMaker is that when it comes to drawing sprites, not only does depth just tell GameMaker in which order to execute draw events, in which order to execute code, it also actually encodes depth as the z coordinate in the vertex buffer that it generates when you draw a sprite and when you draw other things. This also applies to other things that you might try to draw with the draw functions. If I were to go and actually give this a draw event, and first we can say draw self, and then we can say like draw text x minus 50, y minus 50, some editorials regarding the value of various pastries. This also applies to drawn text. If you were to draw other things like, I believe, particle systems, at least if you're manually drawing a particle system or a 2D primitive shape or something like that, depth would also be used in this way. The word is fighting with the tree. It looks really dumb. I probably should have drawn it like below the tree instead of in the middle of it. Alright, never mind. I'm going to delete this event because that really looks really dumb. And I don't want to see it the next time I draw anything. So to make matters a little bit weirder still, and I really hope I didn't make anybody dizzy by doing that. To make matters weirder still, if I were to uncheck the visible checkbox and draw the generic tree through the camera like I'm drawing everything else in here, instead of using the depth value of the generic tree object, we are going to instead be using the depth value of whatever is actively being drawn, like wherever in the draw event we are. So if I were to say with obj generic tree draw self like this, we can't say event perform draw event number 0 here because we don't actually have a draw event. But this will, instead of having the tree be drawn at 100 units below the ground, we're going to be having the tree being drawn at depth equals 0 because that is what the camera is at and that is what is currently being rendered. And this is all stuff that you really don't have to care about when you're drawing stuff in 2D in GameMaker, but it suddenly becomes relevant and generally kind of a pain in the neck to deal with when you're in 3D. So again, I will double down on the recommendation that when you do stuff with 3D in GameMaker, you either have everything on the same depth to begin with, or you do something like I was doing with the billboarded tree and taking over the depth value yourself and then setting it to 0, just for the sake of your sanity. Also, some people do ask about this. When I'm doing 3D in GameMaker, I do like to have all the other objects in the world have their visible checkbox turned off and to draw everything through the camera like this, just so that I can ensure that things are drawn in the correct order, and we can minimize the chances of having things like Z fighting and other oddness, but that may be a subject for another day as well. So when it comes to the billboarded trees and other billboarded objects, and I'm gonna get rid of that. When it comes to the billboarded trees, how these behave when you are when just left up to their own devices when it comes to depth. If I were to comment out the code over here, z equals depth equals 0, so that we're not going to be taking over the depth of the object ourselves. And then since z no longer exists, I can replace that with draw sprite billboard sprite index image index xy 0, and then we should. And this is what would happen if I just ran the game now because everything's depth is already 0. We should just ideally have all the trees in the world being drawn as they were before because you shouldn't have to worry about depth like that. But that is actually not the case. If I were to go to instance layer 1 with the depth equal to -100, and if I were to drag some billboarded trees, I'll drag them off the... No, I won't have them way out in space. I'll cluster some of these trees around the center of the room like this. But we're gonna suddenly have... Oh, you know what? They're still being drawn through the camera object. So if I were to comment out first the manually drawing of the billboard trees and turn on their visible checkbox and then run the game, we're going to be seeing that instead of standing still and being rotating around the camera, rotating to face the camera the way that we would like them to, we're going to see that these trees are gonna wander around on the screen a little bit in ways that we really do not want them to. And that is, again, because of the way that when you use one of the built-in drawing functions, GameMaker will automatically stick the depth value in the Z coordinate of the vertex buffer, and that is going to cause the sprites to try to billboard around a point that is not actually the origin of where the sprites are being drawn. And it's really, this is another one of those things that'll sort of make you a little bit dizzy, possibly also a little bit motion sick if you look at it for too long. So I think I'm gonna stop that and just go back to what we were doing before. If we were to say z equals depth equals 0, as we had at the beginning, this will fix the problem. If you want the trees to actually be drawn at -100, -100, these guys are not being drawn anywhere at all, probably because they are being drawn before the camera. Anyway, that would address the issue, and I'm going to once again, go back to my recommendation that you do not try to let GameMaker just handle the event order of visible objects itself, handle the draw order of visible objects itself in 3D, and you instead have your own render order through the camera like this, because you don't have to worry about things being drawn before the camera like that. Another thing you could do, I suppose, is have the camera be like way off in the sky, like depth equals 10,000 or something like that, and then have everything else at the normal depth. But that's a whole other can of worms. So that is depth in 3D in GameMaker. That is all the reasons you probably don't want to. Oh, there they are. They've reappeared because now they're being drawn at z equals 0, z equals -100, depth equals 0, and we're not having any like weird shenanigans. Okay. You know how sometimes in games, if you manage to clip the camera out of bounds and you find like game objects that are out of view, that are have been removed from the world but not like deleted from the map entirely, or maybe perhaps it's like a staging ground for objects that are going to be spawned in later. That's what that looks like. All right, so if this has ever been a problem for you, hopefully now you know how to deal with that problem. If you're one of the people who've messaged me about this, hopefully this answer didn't come like 2 years too late. Since one of the things that can happen if you have your depth values not being like set to any useful value is that things just aren't drawn at all. It can be a hard problem to track down. It can be a hard problem to like figure out that something is being drawn either like before the camera clears the screen or in the middle of something else where it shouldn't be, or if something by all accounts should be drawn in one location but it's being drawn in the wrong location, like the billboarded sprites that I showed a minute ago. It can be a hard problem to track down if you don't know what to look for. And since I usually just don't deal with depth in 3D at all, even sometimes when people ask me about it, I don't immediately know what's going on because it's not something I deal with a lot. But that's the story. Okay, before I go, one more thing. Everything I just said about depth only applies to when you're using things like draw sprite or draw text in GameMaker. It does not apply to when you're using when you're drawing vertex buffers with matrix transforms and stuff like that. If and I'm gonna try to clean this up a little bit. Let's put one of these generic trees on wrong layer. Let's put one of these generic trees on depth equals -100 here, and this, as I showed before, is going to cause the tree to be drawn nowhere because I'm not actually having it being drawn. So this is going to cause the tree to be drawn below the floor, as we saw earlier in the video. That's fine. But if we were to GameMaker, hello? Okay, sure, whatever. If we were to go and give ourselves a draw event, and let's copy this this matrix set vertex submit matrix set code from the camera. If we were to draw the camera's VB_sphere like this, let's put it at x equals x, y equals y, z equals 0. We're going to find that the sphere is actually just going to be drawn like at z equals 0 in the world here, because depth is not taken into account when you create your own vertex buffers. Depth is only taken into account when GameMaker creates a vertex buffer using draw sprite. There's a part of me that wants to just do like a deep dive on how actual draw sprite works in GameMaker with depth and position and texture coordinates and all that, but that sounds like an adventure for later. In this vertex buffer, we created it. The z coordinates of each vertex are based on whatever we told it to be. In our case, it's going to be whatever was loaded from the model file. If you want to, of course, you can use depth in the matrix build function like this. And this is not really as much of a problem as trying to get depth to work in 3D with sprites tends to be. If you want to use depth as your z coordinate, feel free to do so. That gives you a I suppose a seamless interface with like the room editor, if you really want that. And that's going to cause the sphere to be drawn at 100 units below the floor. Okay. Nothing strange, nothing mysterious, nothing out of the ordinary there. So that's that. Just a small little note on depth in other contexts before I end the video. So there is one more troubleshooting in 3D in GameMaker video that I want to try to have finished by today as well, and that is going to be on certain vertex buffer errors, certain shader errors. that you might also get when you do similar things to what we're doing here. I might also just try to work down the backlog of small, annoying things that you sometimes have to deal with in 3D and GameMaker while this stuff is all on my mind. But my name is Michael. I like wizards and dragons and making games. If you want the code for this project, look for the GitHub repository down in the video description. This is going to be a slightly updated version of the billboarded sprites project. I've removed like the venomous collision stuff because that really wasn't there for any reason, and since 32-bit GameMaker is going away eventually, I want to not have that in as many projects as necessary. If you want to contribute towards these videos being made, I have a Patreon, so look for the links to that in all the usual places. You can see some fun things like your name on the end screen. About once a month, I post a preview of my future plans, although they often go off the rails when subjects like this come up that I want to tackle. Otherwise, I try to post about 2 game dev videos a week, something like this, some tutorial like this, and one Let's Make a Game. So if that appeals to you, feel free to subscribe. Otherwise, I hope you found this useful, and I will see you all later. Special thanks to Zenjamin, Then Nothing Happened, Squarecrow, Sindra Larson, Posho, Gunnar Clovis, GameMaker, Edward Holt, DJ Gibbles, and Army Armbruster for supporting these videos. If you want to see your name in the credits or hear yourself shouted out at the end like this, head on over to the Patreon page down in the video description to join the fun.